The graveyard was quiet, except for the crunch of dead leaves under your boots. You had no reason to be there at midnight, but something had been gnawing at you for days, a pull you couldn't explain. When you saw her standing under the dead oak in a dress she'd worn to your junior prom, your breath froze. Adeline Marcus. Adeline had been dead for 6 months. Her eyes met yours, those soft brown eyes you'd known your whole life, but her skin was wrong. Pale, with a waxy sheen, like a mannequin left out in the rain. Her lips moved, but no sound came out. Then she smiled, a slow, mechanical stretch of her mouth, and took a step forward. Adeline? The word barely escaped your throat. Her head tilted, the movement jerky like a broken puppet testing its strings. "It's cold," she whispered, her voice raspy, raw. "Take me home." You wanted to run, to scream, to do anything but stand there, but your body betrayed you. You nodded. "Okay." She sat in the passenger seat like nothing was wrong, her hands folded neatly in her lap. You couldn't stop glancing at her, at the way her skin seemed to sag in places, at the dark circles under her eyes, like bruises blooming across her face. The car filled with a sickly, sweet smell like rotting fruit, and you rolled down your window. She said, "I've missed you," breaking the silence. Her voice was soft but brittle, like glass about to shatter. You gripped the steering wheel tighter, your knuckles white. I've missed you too." Her laugh was wrong, hollow. It echoed in the small space like something crawling under your skin. "Liar." The headlights sliced through the darkness, illuminating the lonely stretch of road. But in the corner of your eye, you saw her move, her head snapping to look at you. "Do you remember what you said the last time we talked?" she asked, her voice low. You didn't. All you could remember was the fire, the smell of smoke, her screams. You said you'd always take care of me," she interrupted, her voice rising, brittle, turning to sharp. "You said you'd never let anything happen to me." You swallowed hard. "Adeline, Her hand shot out, cold and clammy, grabbing your arm. Her nails dug into your skin, harder than they should have. "You let me die, Bet." The car swerved as you yanked your arm away, your heart pounding in your chest. "I didn't. It wasn't my fault." She smiled again, but this time it didn't reach her eyes. "Then why do you feel so guilty?" You didn't know why you brought her inside. It was like you were on autopilot, your body moving without your brain's consent. She wandered through your house like she belonged there, her bare feet leaving faint, wet marks on the floor. In the bathroom, she stood under the shower, fully clothed, the water running over her decaying skin. Steam filled the room, but it didn't hide the sight of her ribs poking through her dress or the way her hair clung to her skull. "It's not so bad being dead," she said, her voice muffled by the sound of water. "It's the waiting that's hard, waiting for someone to bring me back." Your stomach turned. "What are you talking about?" She turned off the water and stepped out, her movements unnatural, like her joints didn't quite work right. Her eye shifted in its socket, and she pressed it back in without flinching. "You know what I mean, Bet. You've always known." You backed out of the bathroom, your heart racing. "You need to leave. You shouldn't be here." She followed you, her footsteps wet and sticky against the hardwood. "You brought me here. You wanted this. Don't you remember?" The memories hit you like a freight train. The fire, the boys laughing as they lit the match, Adeline trapped inside, pounding on the window, and you, standing outside, frozen, too scared to run in, too scared to save her. "You didn't even try," she whispered, her voice like a knife in your gut. "You just stood there and watched me burn." Tears streamed down your face. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, Adeline." She stopped in front of you, her face inches from yours. Her breath smelled like ashes and decay. "Sorry won't bring me back." You stumbled backward, tripping over the rug and falling to the floor. She loomed over you, her shadow stretching across the room like a dark stain. "You can't undo what you did," she said, crouching down so her face was level with yours. "But you can join me." Her hands shot out, cold and strong, wrapping around your throat. You clawed at her, your vision blurring, her face the last thing you saw before the darkness swallowed you whole. When the neighbors found you, your body was cold, your face twisted in a mask of terror. And Adeline? She was gone. But some nights, when the wind howls and the shadows seem to move on their own, they say you can still hear her laugh. A hollow, broken sound that echoes through the graveyard. She's waiting for someone else to bring her home. My sister, Emma, always had a soft heart, soft enough to break for anyone, even monsters. I remember that night like it happened yesterday. We stumbled out of that cursed house, her eyes red from crying, and soot clinging to our skin. She hadn't just cried for us, though. She wept for the old woman too, despite what that woman had tried to do to us. Despite the oven. When her tears dried, she followed me silently through the house. I found the clothes we'd arrived in, tattered and worn, and she slipped them on without a word. We found other things too, gold coins, gems, silk, treasures the woman had hidden in the attic. I thought, maybe this will be enough. Maybe we can finally be free. But as we stood outside that house of horrors, Emma spoke for the first time in hours. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "I don't want to go back there." I stopped short, turning to face her. What? To them. To him. She wrung her hands, her lip trembling. To her. I wanted to agree. I hated the thought of stepping foot in that house again, facing our father and that woman who called herself our stepmother. But I didn't see another choice. "Where else can we go? We can't survive out here on our own." Emma stared at the ground for a long moment before nodding. "Fine," she said. "But wait. There might be something useful in the kitchen." Her words sent a shiver down my spine. "Emma, no, we don't need anything else from that place." "I do," she replied, her voice steady now. I watched her walk back into the house, her movements deliberate, almost practiced. It struck me then how much time she had spent under that woman's roof, how much she had learned. When she returned, she carried a small bundle of glass vials, each filled with liquid in shades of crimson, emerald, and gold. She said nothing about them, only tucked them carefully into our bags. The forest seemed darker this time, the paths twisted and unfamiliar. But Emma didn't hesitate. She walked as if she knew the way. "How do you know where to go?" I asked during one of our brief stops. She shrugged. "I just do." I should have pressed her, but something about the look in her eyes stopped me. So I stayed quiet, following her lead until the trees finally broke, revealing the silhouette of our father's house. Our father met us at the door, his face a mix of shock and relief. He pulled us into his arms, apologizing over and over. "I thought I'd lost you," he whispered, his voice thick with tears. I felt his arms tighten around me, but the words felt hollow. Lost? He hadn't lost us. He had left us. When I glanced at Emma, she wasn't crying. Her expression was unreadable, her eyes fixed on something distant. Our father explained that our stepmother was gravely ill. "She's been bedridden for days," he said, his voice heavy with guilt. "But perhaps seeing you will give her strength." Emma didn't respond. Instead, she stood abruptly. "I want to see her." I followed Emma into the room, but I couldn't bring myself to go far. The sight of that woman, the one who had sent us into the woods to die, made my stomach turn. Emma knelt beside her, brushing a hand over her pale forehead. "She's so weak," Emma murmured. "Here, drink this." She pulled one of the vials from her bag, tipping the contents against the woman's lips. I moved to stop her, but Emma held up a hand. "It's medicine," she said softly. The woman drank, too feeble to resist. Emma smiled, smoothing the blankets around her before standing. "She'll feel better soon," she said, her tone light. But when she looked at me, her eyes were cold. By the next morning, our stepmother was out of bed. She was thrilled by our return, calling us her dear children, as if she hadn't tried to get rid of us. She insisted on hosting a feast in our honor. "What should we have, my darlings?" she asked, her voice sickly sweet. "Sweetbread," Emma replied, her smile serene. I stared at her, stunned. Sweetbread? After everything? But Emma only squeezed my hand under the table. "I'll make it," she offered. The smell of baking filled the house that evening, cloyingly sweet and nauseating. When Emma served the bread, she drizzled honey over each piece, smiling as she placed plates before our father and stepmother. "Eat up," she said. "It's a special recipe." They ate. It started with a cough, a small, harmless sound. Then came the choking. Our stepmother clutched her throat, her eyes wide with panic. Our father tried to speak, but blood flecked his lips. You poisoned us," he rasped, collapsing forward onto the table. Emma stood, her expression calm. "You poisoned us first." Our stepmother fell to the floor, gasping her final breaths. She tried to curse Emma, but the words never came. When it was over, Emma turned to me, her face unreadable. "We should go," she said. I hesitated, staring at the lifeless bodies of the people who had betrayed us. "Emma, what have you done?" She took my hand, her grip firm. "Don't be afraid," she said softly. "I'll protect you." Her smile sent a chill down my spine. Emma had always had a soft heart, soft as poisoned sweetbread. It's December, and I'm caught in a constant state of irritation. Every time someone mentions the festive cheer or the thought of a snow-filled Christmas, I can't help but wince. The biting cold, the ever-present jolly smiles. It all feels like a bad joke to me. But let's get one thing straight. I'm not a Scrooge or a Grinch. They at least had some semblance of warmth in their hearts by the end of their stories. No, this is not one of those stories. I work a monotonous job, day after day, hunched over a desk, tackling the same tedious tasks. The hours bleed into each other, often stretching into late nights. And at the end of these long days, when I've finished picking up the slack for colleagues who do far less work but take all the credit, I miss my bus home. So I end up wandering past a quaint antique shop where my bus stop conveniently stands right outside. The shop is filled with shelves packed with odd trinkets, vintage books and artifacts that speak of lives long past. The kind of place that promises mysteries and stories from forgotten times. Each time I walk by, I find myself lingering, even if only for a few minutes, letting my fingers brush across the dusty shelves as the minutes slip away. "You seem to favor that one," a soft voice calls from behind me. I turn around to find the shop owner, a woman in her late 30s, with curly black hair that cascades around her shoulders. She smiles, and I notice the gentle warmth in her expression. She often lets me browse without any pressure to buy, especially on those cold nights when the bus takes its sweet time arriving. Was I developing a crush on her? perhaps. Had I missed the bus a few times just to see her? Maybe. But I'll admit it now, it was more than a crush. Something about her seemed familiar, like I had known her from another time. But now she was referring to the book in my hands. "I enjoy a good read," I mutter, closing the book. She raises an eyebrow. "How did you learn Latin?" Confused, I glance at the book in my hands, turning it around to look at the cover. In bold Latin text it reads, "The Magni Mali," or as I had translated earlier, "The Grandest Evil." I quickly flipped the pages, expecting to find English text. Sure enough, the interior is in English, not Latin. "A mismatched cover, perhaps?" I offer, not quite sure what's going on. The shop owner smiles knowingly. "Ah, right. It's always this book, isn't it? Something catches your eye each time you come in." I glance back down at the pages I've come to know all too well. The Demon of Desire. The words linger in my mind as I read aloud without thinking. Demonium desiderii. "The Demon of Desire," she says, her voice quiet, almost as if she's reading my thoughts. She steps closer, glancing at the page I'm staring at. First, a human, given the power to conjure anything he desired. Then turned by a dark witch's love as he burned for heresy. His form, a reflection of his desires. A demon, seeking innocents to corrupt, to seduce them with their deepest wishes. But there's always a price. I should have felt something then. A chill, perhaps, or a sense of foreboding. But I didn't. Instead, my mind wandered, captivated by her words. She pauses, then adds, "If you could have anything you ever wanted, all it would cost you is a little blood. Would you do it?" The question should have sent alarm bells ringing in my head, but instead I found myself standing still, too intrigued by the woman and the words of the book to question her. I stood, frozen by the warmth of her smile and the strange, eerie sensation that something had shifted in the air. "I beg your pardon?" I finally find my voice. She simply smiles, then walks behind the counter, pushing aside a red velvet curtain adorned with gold accents. I hadn't noticed it before, but behind that curtain lay another room, hidden from view. Curiosity gnawed at me, and before I realized it, I found myself walking behind the counter, drawn to her in a way I couldn't explain. She reappears, holding a small rectangular box. She places it on the counter and motions for me to open it. Inside lies a gold pen, pristine and new, untouched by the years like everything else in the shop. "What's this?" I ask, intrigued. "A gift, a good luck charm perhaps," she suggests, her eyes sparkling with mystery. "For all those nights you missed the bus, waiting out here in the cold." I chuckle, skeptical. "And how will a pen help with that?" She shrugs nonchalantly. "I suppose it depends on your faith." "Faith in what exactly?" I ask, twirling the pen between my fingers. The sleekness, the weight, it felt oddly comforting. "Magic," she says, as though the word itself should hold all the answers. I laugh, trying to mask my unease. "Magic? What kind of magic are we talking about here?" "Well, I suppose you'll find out." She's already pulled a blank piece of paper toward me, pushing the pen toward my hand. "Write what you wish for." I raise an eyebrow, still skeptical. "And if I don't believe in magic?" She leans in closer, her voice a soft whisper. "Then I'll have to change that." I chuckle nervously, half expecting to be pranked. But something compels me to take the pen and press its tip to the page. As I do, a sharp pain shoots through my thumb, enough to make me gasp. I drop the pen, watching as blood drips onto the page. "What the hell was that?" I snap, looking up at her. Without a word, she rushes to the counter, grabbing a tissue and wrapping it around my thumb. The air grows still, thick with something unspoken, as I become aware of the closeness between us. Her hand is warm as she gently holds mine, and for the first time, I feel like time is slowing down. "There's magic in your blood," she whispers, her eyes dark and intense. "Right, Christopher. Right." I stare at her, stunned, unsure of what to do. Yet, as if controlled by something other than my own will, I find my hand moving, gripping the pen once again. I want the bus to arrive now and wait for me to board. A dizziness suddenly overtakes me. Before I can steady myself, the bus lights flash through the shop window, turning the corner and stopping in front of the store. The doors open, waiting for me. I can't help but laugh, the absurdity of the situation too much to ignore. "Coincidence?" I mutter under my breath. The shop owner smiles knowingly. "Magic, perhaps." I can't deny the odd feeling that something has shifted within me. The pen, the words, the strange feeling that something ancient and powerful is at work. But when I leave, I convince myself it's nothing more than an odd coincidence. That night, when I get home, I place the pen on my bedside table. The sensation of it still lingers in my fingers, but I try to push it from my mind. I go to bed, but the image of the woman, the words of the book, and the feel of the pen's weight won't leave me. I drift off, but not to sleep. Instead, I find myself on a darkened beach, the scent of vanilla and clementine hanging in the air. I see the back of a woman's figure, so familiar, but I can't quite place her. Her words are soft, distant, but clear enough to send a chill through me. Cursed. Lovers. The dream turns darker. I see blood on my hands, but no wound in sight. The woman reaches for me, whispering something about memories, something about death. The ocean's cold embrace pulls me in. The next thing I know, I wake up, drenched in sweat, but my hand is still holding the pen. And on my bedroom wall, written in my blood, are the words, "I want to remember who I was." I don't touch the pen again that night, but it's impossible to ignore. The next day, I feel drawn to it, a compulsion I can't shake. I carry the pen with me, and somehow I find myself back at the shop. Back so soon, her voice echoes from behind me, and I can't help but feel the pull of something familiar. I step into the room behind the curtain where she's waiting, and I'm mesmerized once again by her presence. There, in that space between past and present, she welcomes me back. And I realize I'm not just a visitor in her world, I'm part of it. And the pen, it's mine, just as much as the darkness that follows me.